Hello, I'm Amanda Walker and welcome to Inside America, the show that brings you insight and analysis of the biggest issues facing the United States right now. In today's episode, the politics of extreme weather. The Trump administration is slashing weather science and shrinking disaster response.
We want to wean off of FEMA and we want to bring it down to the state level. A little bit like education, we're moving it back to the states.
While communities across America are feeling the full force of climate change, from Texas flooding to California wildfires.
Well, you can't backfill the elimination of FEMA. There's no state in America that don't have the resources to ultimately do that.
Sea levels are climbing, flood walls are crumbling, and faith in the federal government's ability or willingness to respond is underwater. Coming up, we speak to people on the front lines of a fight that just became a lot harder.
I feel abandoned. I feel like many Americans who thought we could count on our American government to protect us, especially in our time of need.
And we'll assess the potential nationwide impact of it all.
I do believe that people will die as a result of the cuts that the Trump administration has made.
So, weather has never just been about clouds and radar. It's about who gets warned, who gets rescued, and who gets left behind. And it's all changing fast under the Trump administration. There's been a big drop in funding and people. Staffing has been hit hard. It's down 17% in weather prediction and down 25% in disaster relief, which scientists say could have a huge impact when extreme weather hits. Now, since taking office, Trump has rejected hazard mitigation grants for 6 disaster-hit states, all led by Republican governors. They include Virginia, which sees more coastal flood events than any other state. The Hampton Roads area there has the fastest rising sea levels on the East Coast. Roads are drowning and neighbourhoods are vanishing. We went to find out how they're responding to the cuts.
These lampposts used to light a paved street. The wetlands here are swallowing up neighbourhoods. Put simply, this area must adapt or die.
In Norfolk, we have the highest rate of relative sea level rise on the East Coast. So we experience tidal flooding regularly. We have over 45 days of nuisance flooding, which is basically when flooding becomes a nuisance to people driving in their cars, trying to get to work, school buses trying to get kids to school, etc. Each year.
People like Mary Carson Stiff have been leading the fight for increased resilience to the inevitable. Where these young trees now sit, homes were removed as part of a FEMA-funded property acquisition program.
When you heard that this approved funding to mitigate so much of this was cut, what went through your head?
Basically just how short-sighted we are about risk and recovery. I mean, the cutting of the federal funds that are literally helping communities prepare for the disasters that we're seeing and are happening so much more frequently. It's just unimaginable that we would cut off money that we know is going to actually reduce risk, save lives, help people be prepared.
We kind of joke about, when you buy a house here, it should come with a kayak because you might need it to get out of here one day.
Kim Sudduth has dedicated her career to protecting this part of the world from the increasing impacts of climate change.
I feel abandoned. I feel like many Americans who thought we could count on our American government to protect us, especially in our time of need. It's almost like a preemptive abandonment. They're not even waiting until a storm comes. They're just going to say, nope, we're cutting all of our funding right now, and leave us to begging for help if and when tragedy strikes.
She vows to continue the fight, particularly for her historically black neighbourhood, which is being left out of the soon-to-be-built flood wall currently still on track to receive FEMA funding.
So that side of the river is going to get the flood wall. This side is not. This is a largely black community. What was the explanation for that?
Well, the explanation is that the wall would cost more than the properties it would protect. So to save some money, they're just leaving us without a wall.
Kim believes Trump's cuts are going to make those existing disparities even worse. Thousands of homes in the Hampton Roads area have flooded at least twice.
This side of the street, this side of the street, and this side of the street all flow downward and meet at this intersection.
Okay. And people are just learning to live with it? How are people managing?
Well, you know, we raise our houses as high as we can afford to. This house in particular, it used to be lower, and then they've raised it a little bit higher in their crawl space.
You can't talk about Norfolk without mentioning the engine of its economy. It's home to the largest naval base in the world, but its long-term viability could be under threat from climate change.
So if that naval base is forced out of here because of flooding, because of increased weather events, what impact does that have on the local community?
When we think about the economy associated with the military, it's more than just your shipyards and ship repair, but it's also the tailors that take in the uniforms, or the restaurants where, you know, military, they come and have lunch before they go back to work. Climate change threatens all of that. We'll say our sailors or our soldiers are not able to get to the base because it rained. That is a national security threat.
On a calm summer day, rising sea levels might not be at the front of beachgoers' minds, but people who live here know that extreme weather could hit them first. At Carla's beach house, they're always monitoring what could come next. Lack of support in fighting it is deeply unpopular.
I don't think there should be any cuts in anything like that when it comes to any kind of a disaster or where people depend on funds that they don't have. They depend on the government or somebody else to help take care of them.
I don't understand the logic behind it. I know in the beginning the logic was supposed to be we were going to save all this money, the government didn't have money, we were going to go bankrupt. Well, okay, fine, but then they turned around and passed this humongous bill that spends more money than what we would have spent with these programs. So I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me.
Now, the Norfolk area is just one part of a nationwide map of weather vulnerability. So let's get some wider context. Alice Hill is a former special assistant to President Obama and is currently a senior fellow for climate change policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. She's spent years working at the critical intersection of climate and national security, helping the federal government plan for disasters before they strike. Here are her expert insights on what could happen as a result of Trump's cuts.
The Trump administration has taken some very serious steps that will undermine the ability of the United States to respond to and recover from disasters. Let's just start with the Weather Service. You know, you can't be safe without an accurate forecast. A forecast will tell you if there'll be a hurricane, if there'll be flash flooding, or if there will be a wildfire coming at you. But the Trump administration has proposed significant cuts to our National Weather Service. The National Weather Service is part of the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, known as NOAA, and that is widely recognized as one of the greatest meteorological services in the world. But the Trump administration wants to cut both personnel and the type of resources that agency has to collect data about weather, which produces forecasts. And then there's also been cuts to our emergency management services so that we won't have a strong forecast and we won't have people to come to the rescue when disaster does strike.
We all saw those images from Texas recently, devastating images of the power of weather and the devastation that it can bring. There are labs across the country who have developed and are continuing to develop those forecasting tools that can predict that kind of major weather event. Those labs are closing. What's the impact specifically of that going to be when we know, if we look at the science, that those sorts of images are going to be more frequent?
Well, I think we can anticipate that we'll have weaker forecasts. And with weaker forecasts, there's less time for preparation by communities. You know, the Global Commission on Adaptation has estimated that with just 24 hours of warning, damages can be reduced by about 30%. So we know that getting the word out to people allows them, for example, to move their cars to higher ground, to move, let's say they're raising cattle, move those cattle to higher ground. It allows people to shutter their homes if there are high winds expected, and it allows for evacuation if it's just too dangerous to remain in the area. But without the strong forecasts, there will be weaker information available for people to act upon.
Yeah, and when you follow that trajectory, the logical conclusion there is if people don't have the time, the information that they would glean from a forecast, they're going to die potentially.
Absolutely. I do believe that people will die as a result of the cuts that the Trump administration has made. And there are also reasons for that beyond just the forecast. President Trump, in his first terms, implemented a program that focused on reducing risk before disaster strikes. And that is a really smart thing to do. Our records, our analysis shows in the federal government and from the US Chamber of Commerce that investments of just $1 in reducing risks. So that could be, say, elevating a home. That could be putting shutters on your windows. That could be planting drought-tolerant plants, can save anywhere from $6 to $13 for a community in reduced damages. So it makes a lot of sense to invest in pre-disaster risk mitigation. But the Trump administration has killed a program it oversaw the creation of in 2018, a program that was wildly successful among states. And it's clawed back about $880 million that would have gone to communities to help them prepare for more extreme weather.
So as an expert, what goes through your mind when you see the direction that we're currently going in, which is pretty much the opposite of what you've just described?
I'm honestly frightened because there is no place that's safe. So that means anyone, anywhere can be facing a disaster. Washington, D.C. has just been suffering from flash floods. So with increased temperature, the atmosphere, for every 1 degree of Fahrenheit increase in temperature, the atmosphere can hold about 4% more moisture. That moisture tends to fall all at once, and that causes flash floods. So Washington, D.C., a place that you might assume was safe, is already suffering from these. We are seeing wildfire in New Jersey, in the East Coast, not a place most people would assume wildfire risk is present, but because of changed conditions, we're seeing fires occur in more areas, and those fires burn more intensely, and they are much hotter, and they create their own weather, so they spread further. The devastation in LA in January is proof of that, and we're seeing these fires enter into more urban communities, causing mass devastation and, of course, loss of life and loss of property. So we need to get serious about what is occurring with climate change and prepare for it. We're not doing that, and that puts us at risk. It also makes us an outlier, I think, in the rest of the world.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah, sorry, my next question was going to be, what impact does this retreat from climate science have on the rest of the world? Who fills the vacuum?
Well, I think it's going to hurt us competitively because we need to be adapting to prepare for these events. And we should also be cutting our emissions to avoid the very worst of heating that's going to occur. And we have proven that we are not a leader going forward on this issue of climate change. That has created an opportunity for China. EU was already a strong leader and has continued to try to step up and replace what the void that has been created by the United States. But long term, the United States is doubling down on fossil fuels. And I believe that that will put us at a competitive disadvantage. You can just look at what's happening in China with the explosion of EVs and the sale of EVs across the world. The United States won't be significantly in that market, and it will be overtaken, in my opinion, or at least it's at risk of being overtaken.
And just finally, I'm just interested in your perspective as an expert here, watching all of this unfold. You mentioned that there was some efforts in the first Trump administration. Why this aggressive push to cut weather science, disaster resilience in this second term? Is this just all about the refusal to accept climate change, the profits from fossil fuels? What do you think is fueling all of this?
Frankly, it remains a mystery to me. I think there are a number of elements that are at play. I think that there is a anti-science bias among some constituents. I think that the fossil fuel industry has projections that its products will be needed, so it's doubled down on producing fossil fuels and cutting back on clean energy. So, of course, you know that the Biden administration attempted to support wind and solar energy, and the Trump administration has pulled back that support. So that we have a confluence of political anger that has turned into an anti-science approach. I think that this will be generational for the United States to lose the number of scientists that it is to foreign countries. Those scientists will make lives there and contribute in those other areas, and that will put the United States at a competitive disadvantage, in my opinion. You can look at the number of engineers that China's graduating compared to the United States. I think something like 30% of China's graduates are engineers, only about 8% in the United States, and now we have climate scientists leaving. So we are losing our edge in our scientific innovation and our talent pool, and that it will take us a long time to replace that brain power. The brain drain comes at an expense to our well-being here in the United States.
Alice Hill there, talking about how rising climate risks are colliding with a shrinking federal safety net. But now the debate turns from risk to responsibility. What should the government be doing, and who should be paying for it? Joining us now are two voices with very different perspectives. Rick Spinrad is the former administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. He's a scientist who's spent years inside the federal system. And Peter Roth, who is a contributing editor and columnist at Newsweek. Thank you both for joining us. We've heard a lot about FEMA lately, haven't we? Disaster response, federal disaster response. And Donald Trump said early on he wanted to eliminate it. We've heard that changed to an overhaul since Texas. But really, is there any realistic way that this massively important agency, as these weather events keep happening, keep getting bigger, can be gutted in any way? Is that realistic?
Well, the question of whether weather events get bigger or not is itself fungible. I mean, the population is growing, we're building more, we're constructing more, but there are fewer deaths because of weather incidents, climate incidents now than there were 100 years ago, and the population of the planet has quadrupled. There is a federal role to be played, but FEMA's not getting it right. FEMA screwed up in New Orleans under George W. Bush. They screwed up in Texas. What really needs to happen is a recognition that disaster response really is a local issue. And as we learn more about what happened in Texas, the failure of the local governments to prepare for disaster was the issue. What you need at the federal level is better coordination of response and better allocation of money. You don't need a large federal program ready to resolve every disaster.
But are there any real-world examples where you could say that on a local level, states have been able to handle a billion-dollar disaster all by themselves?
Well, we had 28 of those billion-dollar disasters, in fact, last year, which is about 10 times the number we had, say, 20 or 30 years ago, part of which is attributable to development, as Peter indicated. The nature of these storms, a flash flood like what we saw in Texas was contained to within just a very small geographic area when you get right down to it. A storm like Hurricane Andrew or Hurricane Milton or any of the larger hurricanes we've seen in the last few years oftentimes will hit whole sections of the southeast. Similarly, major atmospheric rivers that hit the west or major fires. So there has to be a federal capability to deal with those kinds of trans-border environmental events that happen across the country on a regular basis.
What about the people perspective on this? We've been out talking to people who live in Norfolk, Virginia, which obviously has its own issues, and they're saying, you know, we don't want these cuts. We want the support of our government, especially for those people who believe that these weather events are becoming more severe and more frequent. So why are you continuing to defend these cuts when the voters don't want them? They don't support them, and the polling does support that.
Well, the polls will show whatever you want the polls to show. You can ask a question about cutting budgets to save money, and people say, yes, we want that. People will say we want better, more effective, more efficient services. They want that. They want everything. But there's a cost and benefit analysis to be done on every situation. If disaster response were effective, we wouldn't be talking about it. It's not effective. The city of Los Angeles, because of years of neglect, could not handle the fires that almost leveled half the city. The sirens that should have been in place in Texas weren't in place. That too is a result of what the voters want. And I think what the voters want more than anything else is a more efficient delivery of the services that they have every right to expect.
But don't they have a right to expect to be protected if a major disaster hits? That their government will have their back?
No, I think that's ridiculous. That's like asking to be protected from a meteor falling from the sky.
Well, not really, because that's far less likely than a hurricane in Texas next month.
These things happen. These things happen. If you don't want to be hit by a hurricane, don't live where hurricanes go. It's like if you don't want to be bothered by airport noise, don't live next to an airport. These things do happen.
But
you cannot protect against them.
But the view is, Rick, that with science and research, the way it has been emerging, that everybody's going to be affected by this. And it's not just about people who live close to the water in Florida. Here in DC, there has been flash flooding recently. So can you make that argument that if you choose to live somewhere dangerous, it's kind of up to you?
Well, there's also the factor that we're all paying for it, right? Whether it's insurance rates that are compounded by the effects somewhere else in the country, we're all paying for that. I do believe it's a federal responsibility, a government responsibility to protect the populace. We do that with national security for years. I worked in the national security system. I don't see a lot of difference in terms of protecting the public from the kind of threats that we see due to environmental hazards. Are they always going to happen? Yeah, they are. We all pay our taxes, and in expectation we should see that we get advance warnings, improved accuracy of forecasts, and with the kind of cuts we're talking about now, we can guarantee we will see no improvement in the services.
And Peter, when you have those states that have had their hazard mitigation grants pulled by Trump, Republican governor states, I mean, if something happens there, at what point do those governors have to listen to their constituents saying, we're really upset about this, and stay loyal to Trump? Could that, down the road, be a break in the Republican Party? The midterms, for example.
Well, I would hope that every politician, Democrat or Republican, puts the interests of their constituents over loyalty to their political party or loyalty to a particular president. I know that President Trump tends to play hardball, but so did President Obama, so did President Clinton, so did President Reagan. It's the nature of how the system works. I do think that people have the right to expect efficient mitigation services. There is no reason not to take FEMA off the list of places that are unable to do it. Remember that we had people still living in converted trailers, converted truck trailers, cargo shipment containers, far too long after the impact of the hurricane in New Orleans. That to me is just as outrageous as Rick may feel the budget cuts at NOAA are. We've got to do a better job of providing good services without waste, without corruption. And we need to take a holistic look at the whole system.
We're running out of time, unfortunately, but I want to ask you both about the notion of privatization. What's behind all of this, do you think? Is it about getting all of these services privatized? I know the Associated Press has reported that Trump appointees could stand to benefit from the privatization of weather services. What's your take on that, Rick?
Well, it's a bad idea. It's already happening in a very efficient and effective manner after many years of collaboration and discussion with the commercial weather enterprise. But there's a few considerations. Weather is a very capital intensive investment. You've got satellites, ships, aircraft, radars. Is the private sector really prepared? I've not had any of them come to me saying, yes, we want to make those investments. The second point is that there is an issue of indemnification. Is the private sector really prepared to take on the liabilities of a blown forecast that results in death? And the final issue is just the very regressive nature of it. Do we really want to be in a position where your ability to get a weather forecast depends on whether you're willing to pay more than Peter is or than I am? No. We pay our taxes, we should get the same quality weather forecast, not dependent on a private subscription to get
Right,
that.
universal access to weather. We're all affected by it. Shouldn't that be the case?
Well, we had the Farmer's Almanac before we had the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and people relied on that, and it seemed to be pretty accurate. If the private sector can do it more efficiently, if it can do it cheaper, more effectively, then yeah, I think things ought to be privatized. I don't worry so much about whether or not politicians or political appointees can potentially develop, just like I don't argue that political appointees and public officials who come on and lobby for more money for the agency they work in or used to work in are somehow arguing out of self-interest and not in the larger public interest. That's too much cynicism for me. I do think, though, that if there are private sector ways to do things more efficiently, better, more cost effectively, they ought to be explored.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Peter, Rick, thank you both so much for your time.
Thank
Great
you.
discussion.
Thank
a
you.
huge issue, so much at stake. That's it for this episode of Inside America. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time.